But we begin here with the massive protests across the country against gun violence following the massacre in Uvalde, Texas. Thousands turning out in cities and towns at more than 400 rallies organized by March for Our Lives, the group founded by student survivors of the Parkland High School shooting in 2018 that claimed the lives of 17 people. And perhaps a sign of the times, the Washington rally was briefly interrupted by loud sounds that some in the crowd thought were gunshots. Turns out it was a false alarm. Today in Uvalde, Texas, the funeral for 10-year-old Lexi Rubio, who was killed in the shooting at Robb Elementary. This photo taken with her parents, Lexi holding the Honor Roll Award she received on the day she died. Her now grieving parents this week testified before Congress demanding action on gun violence. A bipartisan group of senators is still in talks on possible reform. ABC's Ike Ajachi leading us off from Washington.
Across the country tonight, demonstrators outraged by the mass shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde, demanding tougher gun safety laws.
Reasonable gun control is all we're asking for. We're not taking people's guns away. We're just saying nobody should have military-style weapons to be able to go into schools and kill huge numbers of kids within just minutes.
Thousands gathering in the nation's capital for the March for Our Lives rally. A lot of these protesters I spoke to say they have a connection to a gun violence incident, making this fight personal. More than 400 demonstrations taking place today in cities big and small. Tonight, President Biden showing his support.
Yes, keep marching. It's important. Look, this has to become an election issue.
Nearly 90% of Americans support universal background checks and red flag laws. A bipartisan group of senators now trying to hammer out a narrow deal of possible reforms.
My hope is that we'll be able to deliver good news to you, transformative news to you soon, because this country needs it.
Tonight, the family of Robb Elementary School student Lexi Rubio holding the 10-year-old's funeral in Uvalde. Meanwhile, in Oxford, where 4 high school students were killed just last year, protesters calling for immediate action.
Slaughter is too easy in this country, and it needs to stop.
That sense of growing frustration. Ike Ajachi joining us now from Washington. And Ike, some governors not waiting for Congress to do something. What more are you learning about these states potentially working together to address issues of gun violence and school safety?
That's right, Whit. Overnight, the National Governors Association announcing it'll form its own bipartisan panel to make recommendations on how to stop mass shootings. Still, like what we're seeing in Congress right now, that group will likely face challenges finding common ground on how to combat gun safety reform. Whit.
All right, Ike, thank you. And be sure to tune into This Week tomorrow morning. Almost a decade after the Sandy Hook massacre, Martha Raddatz sits down with survivors to discuss the trauma they endured and their hopes for change in America's gun laws.
Fight every day for our... Oh my God.
Our futures are on the ballot, and we will vote you out.
President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack.
January 6th was the culmination of an attempted coup, a brazen attempt, as one rioter put it, to overthrow the government.
In a primetime hearing, the House Select Committee introduced its case that the assault on the Capitol was the violent culmination of an attempted coup orchestrated by Donald Trump. The committee demonstrated that right-wing extremist groups, including the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, were called to Washington and influenced to violence by Trump himself.
We were invited by the President of the Trump asked us to come.
He personally asked for us to come to D.C. that day.
I know why I was there, and that's because he called me there and he laid out what is happening in our government.
Capitol Police Officer Caroline Edwards suffered a traumatic brain injury.
What I saw was just a war scene. I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
And Donald Trump was implicated by his own advisors and cabinet members, who presented evidence of Trump's calculated effort to overturn the 2020 election results.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bull.
And even by his daughter.
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
More of Mr. Trump's former advisors will testify in the weeks to come, including several expected to speak to his fury at his own Vice President, Mike Pence.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts.
Aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, "Maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it."
On Friday, Trump claimed, "I never said or even thought of saying hang Mike Pence." And he added, Ivanka had long since checked out. The question now, will our democracy hold former President Trump and his allies accountable? Already the committee appears to be laying out grounds for a criminal referral of Trump to the Justice Department.
We are undertaking one of the largest investigations in our history to hold accountable everyone who was criminally responsible for the January 6th assault on our democracy. We will follow the facts wherever they lead.
Then there's the challenge of persuading a polarized public. According to a Washington Post poll conducted a little over a month ago, 52% of Americans believe Trump should be charged for his role in the attack. 42% do not.
Last night's hearing was a primetime dud. Nothing came out of it that we didn't know before, and it didn't change anybody's minds.
I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
Stories of ships stuffed with treasure from an era long ago rarely live up to the hype. But as Wendy Urquhart now reports, this true story about a Spanish galleon laden with real treasure is worth billions.
The Colombian Navy has discovered 2 historical boats near the Caribbean port of Cartagena, very close to the wreckage of the Spanish galleon San Jose, which historians described as the holy grail of shipwrecks. New technology has made it possible to get a much closer look at exactly what was on board the San Jose, which was en route to Spain with a cargo of gold, silver and other priceless items when she was sunk by the British in 1708. The Colombian president wants to raise all of the ships from the seabed and display their contents in museums.
Equipment acquired in recent years has made it possible to obtain better images that allow us to protect the integrity of the treasure and carry out permanent and constant monitoring, so that the shipwrecks can be preserved and protected until their riches can be made available to the world in museum exhibitions.
That's a great idea, but he'll have a battle on his hands. The cargo on board the San Jose is worth billions, and a legal row over ownership has been raging between Colombia, Spain and Bolivia ever since she was found near Cartagena in 2015. Wendy Urquhart, BBC News.
Welcome back. Data download time. Poll after poll finds American voters believing the country is on the wrong track. And if there's one other thing that Democrats and Republicans have in common these days, it's that they don't trust Washington to fix it. Look, at the turn of the century, right after the 9/11 attack, trust in government to do the right thing was pretty high, and it was across the board. 20 years later, it is down to just 20%. And let me show you again, no real partisan divide here. In October of 2001, a majority of Democrats, larger majority of Republicans had trust in that Republican control of government. 20 years later, these numbers have collapsed among both parties. The Democrats more than half, Republicans down to just 9% trusting government to do what's right most or all of the time. It's a Democratic government. That's why the Democratic number's a little higher here. But this is really troubling. Now, you might ask yourself, how did we get here? And what do they think next? Well, it's a very cynical public. They believe right now that most candidates that run for office, they don't do it to serve the community. Only 21% think people run for office in order to worry about the greater good. 19% of Democrats think this, 24% of Republicans. Now look at the reverse. A full 65% think most candidates run for office to serve their personal interests, nothing else. And this is across the board. 66% of Democrats believe this, 63% of Republicans. When we talk about the broken democracy, this may be bigger than any polarization problem that we have. If the voters don't trust who's running for office to do the right thing, how does this democracy survive and thrive?